The first time she whispered those words, her voice cracked with defiance. "Bury me here, I'm not breeding material." Her breath came in sharp, jagged bursts, as though every inhale carried the weight of 100 chains. The forest floor beneath her knees was damp, scattered with dead leaves, and shadows stretched long across the golden autumn light. A man stood nearby, boots rooted in the soil, weapon at his side, his silence heavier than the gun itself. She didn't look at him, her eyes were fixed on the soil, like she was trying to claw her way into the earth itself. It had been weeks since they pulled her from the wreckage. Weeks since she woke in a strange camp where men whispered of wars fought light years away. She had no name she was willing to share. No history she was willing to recount. Only scars on her skin and beneath it that told enough about what had been done to her, and what she refused to let happen again. The soldiers who found her knew she wasn't human. Not entirely. Her skin shimmered faintly, as if flecked with metal dust, catching light in flashes that didn't belong to flesh. Her eyes carried a depth too alien, too ancient, and her blood, when she bled, was darker than night itself. Yet she spoke their tongue. She pleaded, cursed, begged. And her one plea was always the same, never to be made a vessel again. The man who stood guard over her that day, Corporal Dallin, tried not to listen too closely. But the words dug into him, burrowed in places he couldn't shake. Not breeding material. It wasn't just fear in her voice, it was resolve, like someone choosing the fire over chains. He knew she'd rather die than go back to wherever she came from. That night, when the campfires burned low and the forest quieted to the hum of insects, Dallin found her sitting alone by the edge of the perimeter. She didn't look up when he approached. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You think death's better?" he asked. His voice carried the bluntness of a soldier, but beneath it, there was curiosity, maybe even a sliver of pity. She turned her head slowly, as though her movements cost her something. "You don't understand what they do. What they've done. Once you're chosen, you stop being anything but a body. A container." Her jaw tightened. "There's no coming back from that." The words hung heavy in the night air. Dallin had seen horrors on battlefields, but the weight behind her tone suggested something far worse, something he couldn't picture no matter how he tried. He didn't push her for more. He just sat, his rifle laid across his knees, the two of them staring into the fire's dying glow. Days passed. The soldiers argued in whispers when they thought she couldn't hear. She wasn't like them. She wasn't even from their world. What right did they have keeping her? Some said she should be turned over to the science corps. Others wanted to release her into the wild, to let her vanish back into the forest where they'd found her. And a few men whose stares lingered too long thought of her as spoils of war. But she stayed. Not because she trusted them, but because running meant being hunted. And she had no strength left for the chase. Then one night came the sound that froze blood, the distant hum of machines. Not the clatter of human engines, but something older, something alien. She rose from where she sat, every muscle rigid, eyes scanning the tree line. "They're here," she whispered, voice trembling for the first time. Dallin looked up from his watch. "Who?" Her answer was barely a breath. "The ones who made me." The forest seemed to tighten around them, every rustle of leaves now a threat. The soldiers scrambled, weapons primed, but she sank to her knees in the dirt, fingers digging into the soil as though the earth itself might hide her. Her lips moved soundlessly, a prayer or a curse. Dallin crouched beside her, his voice low. "You said you didn't want to be taken again. Then don't. Fight." She looked at him then, really looked, her eyes blazing with something more than fear, anger, perhaps, or desperation. "You don't understand. If they catch me, there's no fight. They'll use me until nothing's left. And then they'll use what I carry." Before he could ask, the night erupted. A flash of light tore through the trees, blinding and cold, followed by a sound like metal splitting bone. Figures moved through the darkness, sleek and inhuman, their forms half machine, half nightmare. The camp exploded into chaos, shouts, gunfire, the scream of men who realized they were already outmatched. In the midst of it, she pressed against Dallin, her voice a ragged cry. "You promised me death before chains." And in that moment, as the forest filled with fire and screams, Dallin had to choose: obey her desperate plea, or drag her into a fight that neither of them understood. The choice he made would unravel everything: his loyalty, her curse, and the thin line between survival and surrender. The camp burned in streaks of firelight as metallic shapes moved through the trees like predators that had already won the hunt. Bullets hissed uselessly, ricocheting off armor that looked grown rather than built. The soldiers shouted orders that broke apart under the weight of panic, and the night filled with the harsh stench of burning fuel. Dallin shoved her behind a wall of sandbags as plasma bursts shredded the earth around them. He could feel her trembling, not from fear, but fury. She whispered in a language he couldn't place, her voice low and venomous, as though every syllable was aimed at the shadows tearing through their defenses. "You know them," he said, ducking as a burst of searing light split the air above his head. Her head snapped toward him, eyes burning brighter than the flames consuming their camp. "I was made by them. Do you understand what that means?" Dallin didn't. He wanted to demand answers, but survival pressed harder than curiosity. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the tree line. "Then run. Unless you want to be theirs again." She resisted, just for a moment. "You don't understand what happens if I'm taken back. They'll take what's inside me. What they planted there." Her voice dropped, raw. Something no world should ever carry. The ground shook as one of the machines advanced, its limbs bending at angles that mocked the shape of men. Dallin fired until his rifle overheated, but the creature didn't slow. He cursed, grabbed her by the waist, and forced her into motion. Together they tore through the chaos, weaving between falling tents and collapsing structures. Men screamed behind them, their voices ending abruptly in static bursts of pain. By the time they reached the dark veil of the forest, the camp was ash. They ran. Branches clawed at their faces, roots twisted underfoot, the forest stretching endless in every direction. Dallin could hear the machines giving chase, their movements unnervingly quiet for something so massive. Only the occasional pulse of energy split the night, a reminder that they weren't running fast enough. Finally, lungs burning, Dallin dragged her down into a hollow beneath a fallen tree. The world narrowed to silence, punctuated only by the distant hiss of the alien searchers. He pressed a finger to his lips. She nodded, though her chest heaved with ragged breaths. Minutes bled into hours. The sounds grew distant, then returned, then distant again, as if the machines were circling endlessly. Dallin forced himself to stay awake, but exhaustion threatened. It wasn't until her whisper broke the silence that his mind snapped back to focus. "They didn't come here for you. Or your men." He glanced at her. "Then why?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the burden of speaking truths long buried. "Because I carry their failure. I was bred to be a cradle, but my body rejected it. That's why I ran. That's why they hunt me. What I carry, it's their last attempt to perfect their design." Dallin stared, trying to piece sense from madness. "You're saying they put something in you?" Her laugh was hollow, bitter. "Not something. Someone. A seed, engineered to grow into more than human, more than me. But my body denied them. It twisted, turned it back against them. That's why they want me alive. They'll cut it from me if they must." The forest seemed to close in tighter. Dallin's hand tightened on his weapon, though it felt pathetic against the scale of what she was describing. He wanted to dismiss her words as delirium, but the terror in her voice was too real to doubt. "So what happens if they get it?" he asked. Her eyes met his, fierce despite the tears gathering there. "Then everything you know, your people, your worlds, your children, becomes livestock. Breeding stock. They'll use you the way they tried to use me." For a long time, neither spoke. The night deepened. The machines drifted farther away, though their presence lingered like smoke in the lungs. Dallin's thoughts tangled with questions he couldn't ask. Why him? Why now? Why was he caught in the orbit of something so large, so crushing? Yet as he looked at her, filthy and trembling, her skin glimmering faintly even beneath layers of dirt, he felt a truth anchor in his gut. She had trusted him with knowledge she'd likely never shared before. And with it came a responsibility that had no escape. When dawn finally broke, its light was muted, weak through the heavy canopy. They crawled from their hiding place, limbs stiff and cold. Dallin scanned the woods. Quiet. Too quiet. He knew it wouldn't last. They walked for hours, silence stretching between them. He couldn't bring himself to ask what she meant by carrying their failure. He didn't want the answer. But she finally broke the silence. You still don't believe me. I didn't say that. You don't have to. I can see it in your eyes. She stopped, turning to face him. But you will. When it grows restless. When it starts clawing at me from inside. Her hand pressed against her abdomen, just above the curve of her hip. Dallin's stomach turned. He wanted to tell her she was imagining it, that trauma had broken her mind. But before he could speak, she flinched, a sharp gasp ripping from her throat. What is it? He asked, grabbing her shoulders. Her eyes were wide, her body rigid. It knows they're near. The forest exploded with sound, branches breaking, metallic limbs crashing through foliage, voices not human but sharp, synthetic. Dallin yanked her behind him, weapon ready though he knew it was useless. This time, though, she didn't crouch in terror. Her jaw clenched, her body trembling, and for the first time he saw not just fear but something else, something alive, something violent ignite within her. She turned to him, her voice low, guttural, almost unrecognizable. If I lose control, don't let me live. Before he could respond, the machines were on them. The world dissolved into fire, smoke, and the scream of something inside her waking from its prison. The machines came like a storm with no sky, tearing through the forest with a precision that mocked the chaos they created. Trees splintered, soil erupted, and the ground itself seemed to recoil from their advance. Dallin fired until his rifle coughed smoke, every shot like throwing stones into the ocean. The machines didn't even falter. Beside him, she convulsed. Her body arched as though invisible hands pulled her apart from the inside. A scream tore through her throat, but it wasn't entirely hers, it was layered, a chorus of sounds that belonged to something alien, something waiting. Her eyes glowed with a light that made Dallin's stomach twist. She clutched at her abdomen, nails drawing blood across her own skin. Stay back, she snarled, her voice warping, vibrating with power that didn't belong to her. The words carried more than warning, they carried force, pressing against the air itself. Dallin froze, torn between terror and the compulsion to protect her. But protect her from what? The machines closing in, or the thing that writhed inside her? The first of the creatures lunged, limbs like sharpened steel. Dallin shouted and threw himself into its path, unloading his sidearm point blank. The rounds sparked off its body, useless, until a sudden surge of heat lit the air. Behind him, she raised her hands, and for the first time, the forest answered. Roots burst from the ground, snapping upward like whips, wrapping around the machine's limbs. The creature shrieked, an awful grinding noise, before the roots crushed it in two. She collapsed forward, panting, trembling as if the effort had ripped years from her life. Her skin shimmered violently, her veins darkening, pulsing with something that fought to escape. Dallin grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. What the hell was that? Her lips trembled, words fighting to form. It's waking, using me. I told you, it's not just inside me. It is me. Another machine barreled through the trees, its claws slicing bark like paper. Dallin lifted his weapon, but she shoved him aside with surprising strength. Her body twisted, every muscle locking as if something inside her demanded control. Then, with a cry equal parts agony and rage, she unleashed it. A shockwave ripped through the clearing, a pulse of force that flattened trees and sent the machine crashing into the dirt, its limbs snapping like brittle twigs. When the silence returned, broken only by her ragged breathing, Dallin stared. She knelt in the center of devastation, dirt and ash clinging to her, her hair wild, her eyes burning with inhuman light. And yet tears streamed down her face. I can't stop it, she whispered. Every time they get closer, it fights to survive. It wants them as much as they want it. Dallin crouched beside her, gripping her chin so she'd meet his gaze. Then fight harder. Don't let it take you. Her laugh cracked, bitter. You think I haven't tried? It doesn't care what I want. It only knows hunger. Creation. Spreading. Her hand curled into the soil, fingers digging deep. And one day, I won't be able to stop it. The forest was too quiet now. No more gunfire. No more shouts. The silence of death pressed in from every direction. Dallin realized the other soldiers were gone, slaughtered or worse. It was only the two of them now, alone in the ruins of a forest that had swallowed their squad whole. Hours later, after the machines withdrew, they moved again. He guided her through ravines and over ridges, always heading west, though he wasn't sure why. She moved slower now, every step heavier, as though the earth itself dragged her down. Twice she stumbled, clutching her stomach, whispering in that alien tongue. Dallin held her up each time, though a part of him recoiled at the unnatural heat radiating from her skin. At dusk, they found shelter in a crumbling outpost, long abandoned, its walls scarred by battles forgotten. Dallin set a small fire, though the smoke risked drawing attention. He didn't care. They needed warmth. They needed light. She sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest, face pale and drawn. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she said, softly, "Do you know why I begged you to bury me?" He met her gaze, unflinching. "Because you're afraid." She shook her head. "Because I'm a weapon. And weapons don't get to choose where they're pointed." Her voice dropped. "If I lose myself completely, you'll see what they made me for. And then you'll wish you had put me in the ground the first night we met." Dallin leaned forward, his hands tightening around his rifle. "Then why haven't I?" Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Because you still think there's something of me left worth saving." Neither slept. The night stretched long, heavy with unspoken words. He watched her doze fitfully, every twitch of her body a reminder that something inside fought for dominance. When her breathing hitched, when her hand clutched her stomach as though wrestling an unseen enemy, he almost raised his weapon. Almost. But he didn't. The next morning, the answer to why became terrifyingly clear. She woke with a cry, her hands stained in dark blood, her nails broken where they had torn at her own skin in the night. The ground around her was scorched, the fire pit blown apart. And her eyes weren't hers anymore. They glowed with a brilliance that made him recoil. "It spoke to me," she said, her voice trembling but threaded with something not her own. "It told me what it wants." Dallin steadied himself, though his throat had gone dry. "And what's that?" She looked at him, her expression torn between terror and awe. "It wants you." The silence that followed was colder than any night, heavier than the weight of the machines still hunting them. Dallin felt his stomach drop, as though the earth itself had shifted beneath his feet. He had been guarding her, protecting her, carrying her through fire and ash. And now, the thing inside her had turned its attention fully on him. Outside, in the distance, the hum of alien engines returned. The hum of the alien engines grew louder, a low vibration that rattled the crumbling walls of the outpost. Dallin stood with his rifle tight in his grip, his heartbeat louder than the sound itself. She crouched near the fire's remnants, eyes blazing with that unnatural light, her hands trembling as though something else moved them. "You heard what I said," she whispered, though her voice carried like thunder inside his mind. "It wants you. It needs you. And if I lose control, you'll be its first claim." Dallin didn't flinch. He'd faced death on too many frontlines to be shaken by it now. What unsettled him was the way she looked at him, not with malice, not even with fear, but with sorrow. As if she had already buried him in her mind. He knelt beside her, ignoring the heat radiating from her body. "You said once you were their failure. Maybe that wasn't true. Maybe you were their mistake because they gave you something they didn't plan for choice." Her lips quivered, torn between belief and denial. "You don't understand. It doesn't care about choice. It only understands hunger. If it spreads, it'll consume every world it touches. You think you can fight that with bullets? No. The only way to stop it is to stop me." The engines swelled closer, the forest shuddering as the machines drew near. Dallin's mind raced. Every instinct told him to run, to save himself. But another instinct, one he couldn't name, kept him rooted. She wasn't just some vessel, some weapon. She was more. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't abandon her. "You asked me to bury you," he said quietly. "But what if burying you means burying the only chance to change how this ends?" Her eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, the glow dimmed. The human part of her surfaced, desperate and fragile. "What if you're wrong? What if I unleash it instead?" "Then I'll be here," he answered, voice steady, "to stop you." The walls shook. The first machine ripped through the tree line, its frame dripping with dew, its optics glowing red. Dallin raised his rifle, but she rose before him. Her body arched, trembling, and the thing inside surged, flooding her veins with light. For an instant, she looked like she was breaking apart, her skin cracking with fire. And then, something shifted. Instead of giving in, she pushed back. Her scream wasn't agony this time, it was defiance. The ground split, roots and stone lashing upward, impaling the machine in a storm of fury. More poured into the clearing, but she stood taller, her hair streaming like fire, her arms outstretched. Power rippled through her, but now it bent to her will instead of enslaving her. Dallin watched, or freezing him in place. She wasn't the weapon they had forged. She was becoming something else, something they hadn't expected. A rebellion born from within their own design. But it was killing her. Every burst of power drained her, her body weakening with each strike. By the time the last machine fell, her knees buckled. Dallin caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was cold now, the glow fading. "Did we stop them?" she whispered. "For now," he said, holding her close. "You stopped them." Her eyes fluttered, tears carving paths down her dirt-streaked face. "No. We stopped them. You reminded me I'm more than what they made me." She coughed, blood dark as night staining her lips. "Don't let them take me. Promise me." Dallin's throat tightened. He wanted to lie, to tell her she'd live, that she could rest. But he remembered her first words, the plea she carried like a wound, "Bury me here." "I promise," he whispered. Her breathing slowed. Her gaze softened, the last of the alien light fading from her eyes. In her final moments, she wasn't a weapon, or a vessel, or a failure. She was simply herself. When she was gone, the forest fell silent. The alien hum retreated, as though the death of their creation severed their will. Dallin buried her beneath the oldest tree in the outpost's shadow, covering her with earth and stone. He marked the grave not with words, but with silence, because words could never capture what she was. As dawn broke, Dallin stood over the mound of soil, rifle across his back. The war still raged beyond the forest. The machines would return one day, maybe stronger. But he carried with him something no weapon could destroy, the knowledge that even in the darkest designs, humanity, choice, defiance, love could rise. The moral was clear to him, written not in scripture but in sacrifice. No matter what chains are forged, there is always the power to break them. With that truth burning in his chest, Dallin turned west, into the rising sun, carrying the memory of a woman who refused to be just what she was made for and the seed of hope she left behind.